Hello, everyone. My name is Adnan Saeed from the University of Wisconsin School of Medicine and Public Health and UW Health. I'm a hepatologist and gastroenterologist. And I'm going to introduce you to clinical trials from a patient's perspective. I work in fatty liver disease, so that's why it says it, although we're not going to talk about specific medications. So why is fatty liver disease, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease so important? It is the chronic liver disease that is the commonest worldwide and particularly in the US, and it is increasing exponentially. There are many individuals that are at risk of developing progressive liver disease, scar tissue fibrosis, and eventually cirrhosis. And this is what we hope to prevent by medications, by treatment, and so that's where clinical trials come in. Prevention before you get to cirrhosis is key, and even in cirrhosis there are treatments, but treatment before that is important. There are many medications in different phases of clinical trials for fatty liver disease, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Some will be successful, many will not be, but that's how research works. We won't go any of these in detail. So what are clinical trials for in general? So clinical trials are medical research that involves people that have a particular condition. They are volunteers or participants, and they're useful in helping researchers and doctors learn more about a disease to improve healthcare for people in the future. So that's how most of the treatments that people undergo are tested. So in a clinical trial, participants receive a very specific intervention that is assigned according to the study design, according to a research protocol. This could be a medication, it could be a procedure, it could be a change in behavior such as diet. And that's called the intervention. It is compared to either the best standard treatment, if there is one available. For fatty liver disease, there is no FDA approved medication. So often in these conditions, we use a placebo that looks similar to the study medication, but contains no inactive ingredients. Those are called control arms. So why do we do clinical trials? When done in a rigorous manner like this, it helps us to know whether a particular medication will be helpful or sometimes even harmful or not helpful at all. And so those are really important things to figure out before many individuals get interventions. The first and foremost is to figure out if an intervention such as a medication is safe. That is key, right? Safety is first. And then secondly is to make sure it is efficacious, meaning it is improving certain outcomes in the participants. So for example, in NASH, investigators may receive a drug to see whether their liver enzymes improve, or even more importantly, if scar tissue or fibrosis in the liver improves or decreases. And then sometimes even if clinical outcomes improve, such as not developing cirrhosis or improvement in some complications. There are different phases of clinical trials. You may see this if you ever participate in one. And these are defined and mandated by the Food and Drug Administration and the FDA, so that drugs are studied thoroughly, meticulously, and safely. So they go from phase 1 all the way to phase 4. I'll show you what they mean. So before we even get to clinical trials, how do we know to test a medication? A lot of this comes from what we call preclinical studies, studies in the lab, in test tubes, in cell lines where people test these medications, show that it may work in those models, in cultures, and in some animal models. There could be observation where a drug that's already out there showed benefit for some other condition. And so based on some of those studies, then human studies are done. The phase 1 are the earliest studies. It is done in people that are generally healthy volunteers, people that don't have the disease. And this is a study to make sure the drug is safe to use in humans who are really closely monitored. From there on, if the drug is safe, it's moved on to a phase 2 study. A phase 2 study is a bit larger, anywhere from 100 to 300 participants in general. And this is the first phase whether we look to see whether a medication may be efficacious for a particular type of illness or a cancer, for example, or for NASH. If these are smaller studies, if the answer is yes, that there is a signal towards improvement, it will move on to the more definitive phase 3 study. The phase 3 studies are the large studies where we look at thousands of individuals who are randomized, and I'll show you what that means, comparing this new medication, for example, to a standard of care treatment or a placebo. And if this is successful, this is how drugs are eventually approved by the FDA to come on market. So what you may see terms like we are doing a randomized placebo-controlled double-blind study. What does that mean? So in clinical trials, people with a particular condition come into and agree to participate in the trial. And some of them will receive the drug that's being studied. Some of them will receive placebo. People are randomly assigned to either the drug or the placebo arm. So the patient, so this is not based on any bias or any particular information we have. So if people are similar, they can receive either. So that's randomized. So and then this is random whether they get treatment or control. Double blind, that means that the participant or the patient does not know if they're receiving the treatment or the placebo. And so that's single blind. And the double blind part is that their doctor or their main researcher does not know what they're receiving as well. And that's important to prevent bias, so that if you're receiving placebo versus drugs, people may behave differently or do other things differently that affect the outcome. So that's to prevent that from happening. Of course, somebody has to know. So there are people in the research team and in the main study sponsor who know. And at the end of the trial, they do something called unblinding, where you know who received what according to a code that's kept. And then you can study if the drug worked or not. So why should one consider participating in clinical trial? Clinical trials are a great way to access sort of cutting edge treatment and research, although they cannot promise that, that they will have a positive effect on outcome. They often do. Patients with clinical trials are monitored really closely for obvious reasons, for safety, and so they are frequent visits, and so patients with chronic or any kind of medical illnesses are very closely monitored. So they do get really good clinical care as well from the research team, in addition to their clinical team. The therapy or drug being tested may be better than the current standard of care regimen. And in general, these participants or volunteers are very altruistic people who help advance scientific knowledge and human health in general, and that's how health care advances. So what are the nuts and bolts of clinical research? So the important thing for you to know is, ask is, what is the protocol or the research plan, which describes in detail the study design, the randomized placebo control, or any other study design I talked about. The research plan will tell you who is eligible to participate. So the inclusion criteria, there may be differences based on age and sex and race. There may be differences based on your particular illness, other diseases that they look for, as well as who is not eligible to participate. So there are certain exclusion criteria. So patients who are pregnant may not be eligible to participate in certain studies for safety reasons, certain age, certain other illnesses. So those are exclusion criteria. Describe in detail the intervention, how they're assigned, random or not, what are the tests that people get during the study, how long they are followed up, the number of visits, where the visits are occurring in the clinic, in the hospital, what is the monitoring plan, how do the people get monitored, by phone, by doctor's visits, questionnaires, blood, x-rays, etc. and importantly, who are the research personnel in the research office and the investigator, and how to contact them with any questions at any time. Who are the teams involved in clinical research? There's a principal investigator, or PI as it's called. This is often a researcher or a physician who's in charge of carrying out the clinical trial. They are responsible for the study. There is often a research nurse that collects information and administers the study medications, for example. There's a research coordinator who is important in answering questions, describing the study, getting information, coordinating office visits, travel, testing, and all like, and many other people such as coordinators, sometimes social workers, depending on the study. What's important in any research trial is informed consent. As the name suggests, people have to be informed and they have to consent, so that this is underlying the very important principle, ethical principle of autonomy. It is important for the consent form to be in a layman's language so that patients at any level of understanding are able to clearly understand the study and the study design. And if they don't understand it, they should ask questions until they are completely comfortable before participating. It should describe, besides the research protocol, the potential benefits and the risks of the study, how confidentiality is maintained during the study. It should say clearly that the participant can withdraw at any time for any reason that they're not comfortable. So this is not a binding legal contract, but it is a voluntary agreement. So that's important to know. How are participants or patients in a clinical trial protected? There is always risk when participating in any unknown clinical trial. The study is always voluntary, but you should be assured that patients in clinical trials are monitored much more closely than almost anybody in clinical care for reasons of safety. And so there's a lot of effort that goes into it. The trial, in addition to being monitored by the investigator and the coordinator and the research nurse, is also monitored by what's known as the institutional review board, who approves it and then monitors it on an annual basis or semi-annual basis. They include physicians, researchers, and members from the community who review each protocol to make sure it's adequate and safe. There are often data and safety monitoring boards outside the institutions that monitor all the data coming from participants to make sure that there are no side effects being described that are concerning, that are unanticipated, and if there are any changes that need to be made. And audits do happen from federal agencies like FDA, for example, to make sure research is done safely and ethically as well. Cost should be explained to the patient ahead of time. And of course, patients are made aware if anybody has unanticipated bad side effects. So there's a lot of protections built in. Important questions. So as a participant, if you're thinking about clinical trials, these are some of the questions you should think about asking the research team, so you understand what it is being asked of you. Most importantly, what is being studied? What is the intervention? What is the disease? What's the purpose? Why do you believe it might be effective? Why might it not be effective? Has it been tested before? What are the interventions you could receive the trial, and how will it be determined which intervention I receive? So is it by chance, random, or will I know exactly what I'm getting? So different study designs. Who will know which intervention? Is it double blind, or will the investigator know, or just the sponsor? Will I know, and will members of the research team know? What are the possible risks and side effects and possible benefits? How do they compare with current treatment? What testing is involved? What procedures? How often? Where do I go for this? The hospital, clinic, how often? How long will the study last? How long will my participation last? And who will pay for my participation? Most studies pay for all the medication, the testing, and travel, and other things associated with the research. They don't typically pay for their routine clinical care that happens in addition to that. What term of long care follow-up is part of the trial? Will the results of the study, once it's published, be provided to me? Hopefully, yes. And who will oversee my medical care when I'm participating in the trial? The principal investigators oversees that the research part of it, but your regular physician should continue seeing you is the usual answer. What are the options if I'm injured during the study in terms of coverage for medical or other expenses? And so these are just some of the questions to think about, and how can you find clinical trials if you're interested in participating for any condition you have. The most important resource is somebody that you see regularly, your regular physician or healthcare providers. They can research it for you if they are not immediately available. You can go to your medical center website or anywhere in the region where you can travel to. You can look up online. Some of these studies can be done virtually now or at a distance. There's stuff in the newspaper, TV, radio, advertisements, flyers sometimes in the community. There's an excellent website called clinicaltrials.gov that has detail on all the phase 1, 2, and 3 studies for any particular condition that you can search for. It is publicly available. And then agencies with sponsored research may have information like the NIH, the VA, the FDA, and the Centers for Disease Control as well. So I hope you will consider participating in clinical trials and know that things are done ethically and safely, and ask the questions that I pointed to and when you are thinking of participating. Thanks very much for your attention.